For those who don't know, this is basically a nuclear weapons lab. In the 1960s, actually cut a wing off an airplane in flight. Iran had been using Soviet systems against Iraq and intentionally blinding folks.
That's a location with a lot of mystique around it.
Now, I had been there a number of times before, and particularly with Sublime. I mean, we did lots of very, very high tech. Now, you're talking a national lab. For those who don't know, this is basically a nuclear weapons lab. It's, kind of the premier. We in Sandia were the premier labs in the area. Now, what's critical at this juncture, Cold War ends. Now, that was critical because up until that time, as a nuclear weapons lab, mana was provided. You never had to question whether or not you needed money or what it would be. Cold War ended, we had the peace dividend that we spent too quickly. And so all of a sudden you had to compete in areas that you never competed before. I mean, this is at the highest level. Franksy, Sandia, and Livermore were eating our lunch there, but that was because of the upper level thing. So I went in to do one job and got siphoned off into a kind of a generic military applications directorate. And what happens there is we have a number of critical things that come along. We'd had Urgent Fury, which is Grenada, had Just Cause. And I'm looking at what's going on in the world and how do you want to approach it from a technology perspective. And it was clear, to me at least, is that we needed a whole different set of weapons opportunities. And as comes out frequently, you can't kill your way out of these things. And you looked at, particularly in Just Cause, you're going into Panama, our bitches with Noriega and his henchmen, not with the general Panamanian people. You got big families with long memories. And you really want to minimize fatalities. What's going on right now, in Gaza is an exception to that. But it was, the military perspective is not about killing. It's about imposing will. How can you get the adversary to do what you want them to? You don't necessarily want them to. Now, in the past, we've talked about and have had wars of annihilation. So when you get into World War II and how you went about, you literally were annihilating the adversary. And now the kinds of conflicts that we're developing called for totally different rethinking on application of force. So it was from that I had came up with the concept of what I call non-lethal weapons defense. Now, the police, of course, had this issue already. And was it Walker? There was a critical case that had just emerged where you couldn't shoot a fleeing felon. And that changed the police act. So they were already starting to look at that. I was looking at it from a much broader concept, from application of force, but it was from the simple stuff you know about, like tasers and beanbag bullets and pepper ball and all that, up to what we called strategic incapacitation. How do you take down a nation state and do that without casualties or minimal casualties and not secondary and tertiary casualties? I.e., if you take out the power system, how long are you going to bring it up before you start having secondary fatalities and all that? So started developing that, and that led to lots of studies and conferences that I ran and NATO studies, and eventually to the Council on Foreign Relations and participating with them, and Science Board, Defense Science Board.
Can you get into some of the specifics with some of the non-lethal weapons that were developed?
The whole concept, yeah. I wrote, there's a whole book. The first book that actually the second book was called Future War, Non-Lethal Weapon Warfare in 21st Century. And everybody thinks about this generally in terms, like I say, the anti-personnel stuff, tasers and all this. And I did know the guys who did tasers, but when you got into the more complex applications, like how do you take down a country for negotiating? And it can be done. That gets into the more sensitive system. But a lot of it did have to do with application in electromagnetic systems and things of that nature.
Can you get into that, or is that stuff sealed?
Well, the problem there is I'm primarily dated because I worked at Lannel and then I retired from there in '95, the second time. And I was later with the Army Science Board and some others who were overlooking into those systems. But I just wait. I mean, what we've done with lasers have always been the great promise. Infinite magazine and all of that. Microwaves took on just mythical proportion. Every study I was on, we found out how many people you could just, pulse power, and there's a lot of stuff you can do, and it has come a long way. The same with lasers, the efficiency has increased in power and those sorts of things. So it's, but where we are today is, I'm sure, light years ahead of where we were when we were just, developing it. Most people don't know it, but MICOM, which was Missile Command, I think it was in the 1960s, actually cut a wing off an airplane in flight.
No kidding.
Yeah. That was a CO2 laser at the time, but don't realize that these things went back, and it's taken a hell of a lot of work and tons of money to get to the capabilities that exist today.
Where was that laser fired from?
Oh, that was Redstone.
That was Redstone?
Redstone Arsenal, yeah.
Right down the road in Alabama?
Yeah.
Was it fired from Earth?
I don't know. These were not fielded systems. We're talking, again, basic R&D.
Okay.
But, it was just that you had the capability to test it at the time, and, that far back.
To your knowledge, have we used these weapons?
Oh, we have. They've been developed. Kind of a classic example. I was controlling two different laser technologies. One was totally in the black world, and the other one was white, but classified. And the big mistake was the one that was white world but classified, or black, they went out and developed a constituency that supported it, said, hey, we want these things. See, a lot of what my job was, people say, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a translator. And by that I meant I would tell the military community, here's what, the science can do. I would tell the civilian laser community, here's what the military wants.
This is what we needed to do.
Yeah. And so this was one of the key areas. So what had happened is that this one group developed something that became Stingray. And it was a counter laser system. Now remember, we're still talking bad old days. And the problem a huge problem in the Soviet battlefield in Europe was we could kill the tanks, but they came with lots of friends and neighbors. And so the issue is, how do you stop enough number at a time? And Stingray was designed to go out and blind the lasers, or blind the sensor systems, so you had enough time to hit it with hard munitions and things. But the other technology, frankly, was better, and they finally decided to uncover it. And the requirements community looked at that and said, "But I know this." So the requirements went to what it was. Interestingly, fast forward to Desert Storm, I guess, and they decided to field it. Won't get into individuals, but anyway, it went over. And there's a general who had lost a leg, so he was, sensitive to those things, and said basically, "I'm not going to use it. I'm afraid of," because they were potentially blinding. They were designed as a counter-sensor system. But I remember giving briefings in the Pentagon, and Max Thurman was the vice chief of staff at the time, and he'd get dramatic. "I got eyeballs that are draining down." That's not what you want. So the whole issue on blinding lasers, but we had already known that Iran had been using Soviet systems against Iraq and intentionally blinding folks.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.